It should. Okay. Yep, it looks, I see the little red recording button.
Okay. I see Glenn Peters trying to join, and it seems like he's having trouble. I've let him in, and I think you've let him in.
Okay.
Hey, Lorna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I couldn't figure out the Zoom deal, but this is Jim Richardson up in La Push, and I actually just dialed the phone number.
Okay, good to know. And you're 4791, so that's Jim Richardson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, back on mute.
All right, thanks.
There's Glenn.
All right.
Maybe.
I know, we've seen that you've
At
tried
least,
to log on a couple times.
Yeah, don't move.
Something's going on the screen, but we're trying to finish up a salmon advisory meeting at the same time. That started.
Oh, that's where everybody is.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. Something's going on with this because it won't let me stay signed on. Going in and out.
That's weird. I have no idea. Do you want to give it another minute, Heather, or go ahead and?
I think it's okay to start with introductions, maybe. I think we should. I don't want to wait too much longer.
Okay.
So I'll start with us. Hello to everybody. I'm Heather Hall with the Intergovernmental Ocean Policy Division at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm here with Lorna Wargo. Both of us work on halibut management. We represent the agency at the Pacific Fishery Management Council for halibut, but also other groundfish. Some of our other responsibilities include coastal shellfish and Dungeness crab. And let's see, who else do we have? We don't have, Whitney's not on with us, so I think we're the WDFW representatives for halibut, although I will just note the other agency staff that's on the call, not necessarily have to introduce yourselves, but I see we've got Sam Bunn from Department of Fish and Wildlife and Alex Safiq from Department of Fish and Wildlife also on the call. Thanks for joining us. And then I'm just going to go down the list here. I see we've got Jim Richardson calling in. Thanks for joining us, Jim. And then there's another call-in number that I don't recognize, but the last four digits of the phone number are 7172. If you could unmute yourself and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Heather, this is Dave. I can't believe you don't know that number by now.
Well, you confused me because you are on here twice. So
yeah,
don't even.
I'm on there. I'm on the computer, but I don't get good sound on my computer with our bandwidth, so I always use the phone. Goodbye.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for joining us. And then, Butch, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And we always try to forget Dave. But Butch Smith, El Waco, also sit on the PFMC council with Heather and Corey and Phil, and just got reappointed to another 3 years. So thank you for putting this meeting together, Heather and Lorna. Looking forward to seeing what we can come up with.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Butch. Let's see. Then next we've got DL.
I'm just looking I'm watching. I'm interested because I want to learn more. So I'm not involved in anything or anybody. I'm just a member of the public observing. That's all.
Well, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate that. Welcome. You're next, Glenn.
Hi, I'm Glenn Teeter from Van Ripers in Area 5.
Thank you. And Randy?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, Brandy Lato, Area 3, La Push.
Thank you, Randy. Steve?
Thank you. Yep, Steve from Westport
Hmm.
Charter Boat Association. Westport Charter Boat Association.
Thanks, Steve. And then I have Lowell Becker.
Yeah, I'm Lowell Thacker. I'm just avid fisherman, although, you know, I do work for DNR, but that has no official capacity on my here from my work association, just because I fish.
Good. Thank you for joining us, Lowell. Let's see, our people. There's Glenn again. Well, we may have others join us as this other meeting concludes, but for now, I think we'll just get rolling here. As you saw in the notice from Lorna, the purpose of this meeting is to consider ideas for the Washington recreational halibut season in 2024. This is an annual process that we do each year. And then we'll also be at the end of the meeting briefing you on some other work that the PFMC has taken up under the catch sharing plan changes that are looking at some potentially longer term changes. So I'm going to just move to the agenda here and walk through that and lay out how we're seeing the time we have allotted for this playing out. So we've gotten ourselves through introductions here so far, and then we're going to walk through halibut management overview. It's got an interesting different components to it maybe than other fisheries that folks might be familiar with. Then we'll start off by reviewing the current season, which will help us think about our plans and ideas for 2024. And then, as I mentioned just a second ago, then we'll update you on other topics that are coming up under this agenda item, under the catch sharing plan, and then review next steps. And we hope to be done here by 6:30. Are there any questions on the agenda before we move forward? Okay, not seeing any. Lorna's going to walk us through this next couple slides here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather. Letting Butch back in. Might want to watch as I go through. He seems to be getting booted out. So yeah, for halibut, there are multiple players in management. The International Pacific Halibut Commission, or IPHC, is an organization established by convention between Canada and the US in 1923. The IPHC has been managing and researching halibut for 100 years, making halibut one of our best understood stocks. And based on scientific advice, the IPHC sets the allowable harvest of halibut annually for both countries. At the U.S. federal level, both the Pacific Fishery Management Council, or as we refer to it, just Council, and the National Marine Fisheries Service have roles in management. The PFMC, or Council, is one of 8 regional councils in the U.S. That are responsible for managing fisheries in federal waters, and it coordinates management between Washington, Oregon, California, and Idaho. The council sets policy, develops management plans and regulation recommendations, And the National Marine Fisheries Service, or nymphs, in turn, is the federal regulatory and management body for fisheries. And the regulations that are recommended by the council are implemented through nymphs. And you'll see there's an arrow there to Area 2 catch sharing plan, and we'll speak to that a little bit later. And then finally, for WDFW, we have an advisory role in the management of halibut with responsibilities for monitoring and enforcing Washington fisheries and facilitating stakeholder engagement. So we can go to the next slide, Heather. Just to orient you, here's a map to the region under regulatory authority by the IPHC. So you can see that encompasses Alaska from the Bering Sea through the Gulf of Alaska, includes British Columbia, and then the US West Coast. Area 2A here, you'll hear us reference that. And that's where Washington, Oregon, and California all fall in Area 2A, and we're at the tail end of the halibut resource. And so often our fisheries are considered maybe somewhat inconsequential to the big scheme of things. Okay, next slide. So here's a map just to orient you within Washington, our catch areas, and how we refer to them for halibut management. So from south to north, we have the Columbia River, which is Marine Area 1, the South Coast, which is at Westport or Marine Area 2, what we call North Coast, we combine Area 3 and 4, and then Puget Sound. Sometimes we've included Area 5 there, or sometimes it gets separated out as the straits, but generally those are the terms we use for halibut catch area designations. And then you can just see we have responsibility for interviewing anglers at access sites. We're collecting catch data, biological data, and then generate the catch estimates that we report to nymphs weekly. And also have a distribution list. A lot of you are on that. If there are folks that aren't, would like to be added, we can do that. You get those weekly catch updates as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, management of halibut in Area 2A is accomplished through the council. It's catch sharing plan. This is a council document that guides tribal, non-tribal, commercial, and recreational halibut fisheries off the coast of Washington, Oregon, and California. It prescribes a catch allocation formula and the general season structure of the fisheries, in particular for the recreational fisheries. It includes quite a bit of detail. Each year, when the IPHC meets in January to determine the total allowable catch, we then in turn use the catch sharing plan to allocate that allowable catch to the 2A fisheries across the 3 states. And that framework is described in the catch sharing plan. And then the particulars in each year are adopted through regulation by nymphs. And there is a copy, this link, when this presentation gets posted to the website, that'll be an active link folks can use to see the actual catch sharing plan. Okay. And this next slide just shows kind of an illustration of the framework, which prescribes how the 2A total allowable catch is allocated. So we see on the table there, the top row, the TCEY, that's the total constant exploitable yield. Hopefully I got that correct. And that is set by IPHC based on scientific advice. Then it steps down to the 2A TAC. It's also referred to as the FCEY, or fishery exploitable yield. We can call it quota for less to wrap the mouth around. And essentially the difference between those two, which here you see is the 1.65 million and the 1.52 million, accounts for, they subtract for wastage and bycatch. So then it's the 2A TAC that gets divvied up across the US West Coast. The first sort of split is 35% of the TAC goes to the tribes, I should say, it's plural, and then non-tribal is 65%. Then the non-tribal is divided into 4 shares. So there's the commercial fishery and then each of the state's fisheries. And you can see there in the colored pie chart that Washington sport gets 35%. Commercial for all 3 states combined gets 31%. California sport gets 4%, and the Oregon sport gets 30%. So.
Thanks,
Unless,
Lorna. I haven't seen any questions yet, but.
Okay.
So within the catch sharing plan, we've described management goals that are specific to Washington recreational fishing fisheries. And so that includes, establishing our season structures for each sub area that is intended to maximize fishing opportunity in a way that doesn't exceed the quota. And then number 2 here is that the goals include flexibility through in-season actions such as opening additional fishing days or shifting quotas between sub areas. And I'll say that number 2 really was something that evolved primarily after the pandemic, during the pandemic, in response to the pandemic, and that really did help us provide this opportunity that we're talking about under the first goal and achieving our Washington sport allocation overall. And so then also within the catch sharing plan, we have different objectives and different things that we're looking at by sub area. But starting out overarching for all sub areas, we and this is, we've been doing this for several years, but it hasn't always been the case where we establish season dates by the end of November. And this aligns with the council process that we talked about, or we will talk about a little bit more here. But by the end of the November, the council will have approved season dates for different sub areas, but in particular Washington. And we know that, and then we can post that information to our website, even though they're technically considered tentative at that time. And then also for all sub areas, if there's additional quota that remains after the final opening day in June, we will have additional fishing opportunity in August and September. And just recently we've made the objectives include the opportunity to be open up to 7 days a week in August and September. So really just trying to ensure that we are taking our full Washington allocation. And then getting down into the sub areas. So for Puget Sound, and this is also something that has changed. We currently in the catch sharing plan, the earliest date that we would open is April 1. It outlines a season structure where it can be open up to 5 days per week in April and May, but then up to 7 days per week in June. On the coast, the earliest date to open is April 30th, and that's really intended to align with open days in the Puget Sound. So we have open days that are spread out amongst all of our sub areas. The coastal sub areas are generally open up to 3 days per week in April, May, and June. In the South Coast, at times we have had some a little bit of remaining quota that isn't enough for a full all depth fishing day. So there is a nearshore area that is described where we can have a kind of a mop-up fishery in the South Coast nearshore area if there's just a little bit of quota to be used there. That would be open the first Saturday after the primary fishery closes and could be open up to 7 days a week until that quota is taken. In the Columbia River, this area is coordinated with Oregon, so it follows along, if you're familiar with salmon, it also follows along the Leadwater Point area in Washington down to Cape Falcon, Oregon. So we work with Oregon to make sure that we're developing halibut season dates that they agree with and support. This area, Columbia River area or Marine Area 1 is not open on Saturdays, but it is open up to 3 days per week in April, May, and June. And similar to the South Coast sub area, there is a nearshore fishery in this area, but the difference here for the Columbia River is that we reserve 500 pounds for this nearshore opportunity. It's really just an area where there's bottom fish fishing, but if someone were to catch a halibut in this area, they would be allowed to retain it just by having that 500-pound quota reserved for that. And then these are not in the catch sharing plan, these season setting principles, but we've also followed along these season setting principles for several years. They were particularly helpful to us as we tried to navigate the different season that we had under the pandemic. But we held to these ideas that we've talked about for many years for our fisheries. And so the first one here is avoiding effort shift, so that we're maximizing the season length and fishing opportunity in all of our sub areas. And we do that by aligning fishing days as much as possible. So you'll see that's why the Columbia River and the South Coast or West Part often have very similar season dates, and the North Coast and CQ at times have had very similar season dates, although we departed from that a little bit last year because the Puget Sound catch was a little bit slower and there was a different, just a different approach taken there. We want to provide advance notice of the season dates to allow anglers to plan. And then add season dates in season. So having the season dates spelled out explicitly as much as possible is really helpful. And then adding days if needed is an option as well. And then when we're looking at seasons and setting the season structure, we want to acknowledge areas where catch is not reaching the quota and add more fishing opportunity in those areas as a priority to adding changes to other areas where they're successfully achieving the quota. And then we also have very often recognized traditional fishing days in marine areas. So for example, the North Coast has at a minimum been open on Thursdays and Saturdays. The South Coast in Westport, traditional days are Sundays and Tuesdays. And when we talk about CQ and Marine Area 5, we're also aware of the Halibut Derby. That is a long-running derby in that area, and trying to be sure that the season dates that we have get the fishery at least to Memorial Day, so that there's that Halibut Derby is preserved. So in recent years, we've also really utilized a flexible approach to managing the fishery in season. And this really, you'll see some graphics here as we go forward. But for many, many years, the seasons on the coast were taken in just a matter of days. And when we talk about Memorial Day, it was kind of considered a success if especially Westport and the North Coast made it through Memorial Day. Since the pandemic, we've seen changes in fishing effort and where people are fishing. And we've used this flexible in-season approach to transfer quota to where areas that aren't taking their allocation after we get through Memorial Day and we start looking at June and potentially August and September and shifting quota out around to different areas, providing opportunity, maximizing that approach where we take our full Washington allocation by just looking at the Washington sport allocation in total, less so than the specific sub area quotas. And that, we do that with a lot of coordination between the different ports and where we are in the season. It really relies on the good working relationships we have with fishing representatives from those ports. So here in the pie charts, this is an example using 2022 where you can see the quota allocation that's specified in the catch sharing plan allocates 44% of the sport allocation to the North Coast, 27% to the Puget Sound, 23% to the South Coast, and 6% to the Columbia River. And then through the flexible approach where we're managing more to the Washington sport quota, it's resulted in kind of a shifting of that allocation where the North Coast took only 36% of the quota. The South Coast then took 33%, and the Puget Sound 23%, and Columbia River 7%. In this particular example, and as we've been using it, there was still a little over 52,000 pounds of quota remaining. So this flexible approach didn't close a fishery any sooner than it already would. The fishery, like for example, in the North Coast and the Puget Sound, went through the entire season, but rather than getting to the end of the season before we shifted quota, it did that in season, so we could really maximize the amount of the Washington sport quota that was taken. So let's see. I think I'm going to just shift to the next slide here. The halibut management timeline, I think I like to show this slide. It's a reference to the timing of the halibut decisions, and starting with where we are now here in August. This is where we kick off the annual season setting process by holding this meeting here today, where we're seeking input on the catch sharing plans and the elements of the catch sharing plan that are updated annually. So the information that we receive in August is then Lorna and I will conclude this meeting and we'll draft a report that we submit that reflects the input we hear and submit that to the council, where the council will consider it at their September meeting. In September, the council selects a range of alternatives, including a preliminary preferred alternative, and the range of alternatives includes status quo. At times we've met and had very, very few changes to the catch sharing plan that we submit, where people say, I think what we have in place right now is working, maybe tweak this a little bit here and there. But having the range of alternatives and that are they're available for the public to discuss and provide further input to the council through another stakeholder meeting that we will hold in October. So the range of alternative goes out. You can take this home to your fishing groups or the folks that you work with and get input on this range of alternatives. In October, we'll have another meeting and you tell us, what you think about the different alternatives. And then that's where we will take that information and we will actually craft, and before we leave the public meeting in October, we will have outlined season dates for 2024 that are our recommendation to the council for their decision making. When the council, after the council takes action in November and more than likely adopts our recommendations, then we come home and post those dates as preliminary to our website. And that's that ability that people then have to plan and prepare for the upcoming season. We very, well, I would say rarely, but I think it's more like if have never seen the dates that we've been proposed, that have been proposed and adopted by the council, not been adopted by the IPHC and then implemented into regulation by National Marine Fisheries Service. But there's a chance that could happen, but they're generally really good dates for planning purposes. But after November, we still don't know what the quota is until the IPHC meets. They have their first meeting in November, which is, it's called their interim meeting, and they get the scientific information from the stock assessment. And we get a snapshot look of what the stock assessment is telling us about the stock. And then in late January at the IPHC's annual meeting, the commission adopts harvest limits for all of the areas that you saw in that map, all the way down to area 2A, and they're set for that year. So the IPHC will be meeting in January 2024 to set the quotas for 2024. Regarding the 2A quota, so the quota for Washington, Oregon, and California, in response to a proposal brought forward by Washington tribal representatives and largely led by the Makah tribe, with support from Area 2A managers and stakeholders, the IPHC adopted a consistent 2A TCEY of 1.65 million pounds that was in place for the 2019 through the 2022 season. The rationale for the proposal was really to provide stability to all fisheries in Area 2A. So if folks have been around for a while, that, I think it was 2008 or 2009 to 2015, the total 2A fishery or fishery CEY or TAC or quota was less than 1 million pounds. And from 2016 to 2018, it was just over 1 million pounds. And that amount was divided for both the state and tribal fleets. And during those years when the 2A quota was less than 1 million pounds, that's where we had sport seasons that were lasting just a number of days in many areas.
Heather, I think you muted yourself somehow.
How long has that been going on?
Like 30 seconds.
Okay, good. Phew. I was going to say I've covered a lot. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know how I did that. So anyway, this consistent 2A quota that we've had for 2019 to 2022 really did stabilize our seasons. We've been able to provide more fishing opportunity. We have certainty from year to year when we're setting these season dates that have really, it's really been to the benefit, I think, of every sector that participates in the halibut fishery. So in 2023, the IPHC did once again adopt a TCEY of 1.65 million pounds. And as you saw in that earlier slide, that resulted in the fishery quota of 1.52 million pounds. But I will tell you that it came with a lot of discussion and some pushback. What we're seeing from the stock assessment the last couple of years, it's indicating that there is a reason to be precautionary with the halibut resource. And the stock assessor noted that the stock is at an unprecedented level due to poor recruitment. We're relying on really just one year class, the 2012 year class, that's working its way into the fishery. And there has been low levels of recruitment that we haven't seen since the 1960s. In 2023, all other management areas in the IPHC's management authority took a reduction in their allocation, with the exception of Area 2A and Area 3B. There was support for maintaining the allocation for 2A and 3B, basically because those two areas showed increases in the weight per unit of effort, which is a metric that feeds into the stock assessment. And those increases weren't observed in other areas where they saw reductions in their WPUE. So it was adopted. There was some exceptions that supported the rationale for 2A. To keep our 1.65 million pound TECY, but when everybody else is taking a reduction, when there's this indication from the stock assessor that there's reason to be precautionary, then it puts a lot of pressure on us. So I would say there's some uncertainty in what we're going to see from the IPHC stock assessment in 24. And I think that maintaining a consistent allocation at the 1.65 million pound level could be challenging. I'll say we've really appreciated the coordination and collaboration with the tribes and stakeholders in Oregon and California, and then our management counterparts in those states as well. And we get together and discuss the stock assessment before we go to the annual meeting. We have we go to the annual meeting together with a plan for how we're going to approach the 2A TAC in supporting all sectors in that effort. And so I just want to highlight tonight for folks that are listening to that participation in the IPHC annual meeting by stakeholders from Washington, Oregon, and California is really important. The Washington tribes bring a full contingent of representatives to advocate on behalf of all of Area 2A. And we've really seen a decline in the number of stakeholders that attend the annual meeting. I mean, really since the pandemic. We had a regular group of stakeholders that went before the pandemic, and like a lot of things have changed and we haven't really shifted back to normal. But I do want to put a shout out for the importance of that meeting. And of course, Lorna and I are available as resources if you are interested in attending, and we can help you navigate that process and tell you what it looks like and how your voices can be heard during that process. But I just wanted to highlight here as we start looking ahead to 2024. So moving on to the halibut season for 2023, again, as we start thinking ahead to 2024, I think it's really useful to reflect on how we approached the 2023 season. So overall, in 2023, our approach was to continue to provide more opportunity earlier in the spring. We heard this loud and clear from angler input at meetings like this, and to really address the fact that we haven't been achieving our full quota the past, since the pandemic, really. And so just a note that prior to 2022, Puget Sound opened in the later part of April for 3 days per week. This year, the season started at 5 days per week and then expanded to 7 days per week in June. Also new for 2023, we aligned the season in Marine Area 5 with the let's say the eastern portion of Puget Sound, so Marine Area 6 through 10. In the past, this area, Marine Area 5, was more aligned with the North Coast and then opened later and for fewer days per week. The South Coast also increased the number of days per week that they're open traditionally in May by adding Tuesdays. So that took the Marine Area 1 season from a 2-day per week structure to 3 days per week. And then in June, because for Marine Area 2, oftentimes the full quota for that area is taken by May. But we have set aside dates in June so that if there is available quota, people know when those fishing dates are and they can plan for them. We adopted those dates as part of the preseason package, so we didn't have to take any in-season action to add those dates later. They were just there, they were established, and they just went into play when we hit June and there was plenty of quota left. To start the season, both the North Coast and the Columbia Rivers maintained their traditional schedules, so there weren't changes to those areas. And then we added dates in June through in-season action. For the North Coast, Fridays and Sundays were added, shifting them from a 2-day per week to a 4-day per week schedule. And for the Columbia River, there were 2 Tuesdays that were added. I see your hand, Glenn. Just a sec here. I just want to say too that when we're thinking about potential changes for 2024, things like having the dates in the rule in advance, which is something we could have done for the Columbia River, would have eased the process there. And then if we didn't have the quota, we wouldn't open the date. So just teeing that up for now. But I'll pause here and get to your question, Glenn.
So my question is, the way this is written on the screen here, did that have to be written like that in the catch sharing plan?
Did it have to be written like what?
Like what we're seeing right here in the screen, where it's all spelled out 5 days a week, 7 days a week in Puget Sound, the North Coast. Did it have to be spelled out like that?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. This isn't an excerpt from the catch sharing plan, so it is written a little bit different. But if your question is, how much detail do we have to have in the catch sharing plan? Can we just say we're going to be open from May 1 to September 30th and
exactly.
Then do what we need to do?
Let us manage it our way, the way we have been for the last 8 years, up to the TAC, recognizing that within ourselves, it will have to minimize our seasons if our TAC goes down significantly. But Can we do that as an in-season management? But as far as the catch sharing plan, hey, we're open 7 days a week from April 1st until September 30th.
What we've had this conversation, and when we talk about it with nymphs, the regulatory body, what we're trying to achieve by providing some specificity, I'm just not going to get it, but you know what I mean. Here is we're being as transparent as we can be with our intent. So our intent is to do it this way. And if there's, if we have room for quota, that's where we say we'll open in August and September up to 7 days a week. But we really need to provide as much transparency to the public about what we really intend to do. That's where we get into this detail. And I agree that it's truly trying to find the right spot where we're telling the public this is what we intend to do, and we put that into regulation. And then ideally, we can do that in a way where we don't have to do so much in-season action, but that's where we gain our flexibility.
Well, I understand that. I guess as far as the public is concerned, I mean, we play this game with the salmon, north of Falcon. North of Falcon gets decided at the beginning of April. Well, hell, the regulations don't come out until after July 1st when the salmon season's already started. So it's all done by emergency rule. Now, I mean, I think the public is used to all this, and I mean, it's not a big change. We've been doing this for the last 8 or 10 years with north of Falcon.
This was several years ago, and before the leadership at National Marine Fisheries Service that we have now. But I asked the question, why is it different for salmon? Why is halibut different from salmon? Why can they do everything from in season just like that? And it is the overarching management structure that is in place, and that is the roadblock to us being able to approach it the way we do for salmon, with emergency rules and in-season management. And I agree, it would be ideal if we could, but that's just not the way the management structure is set up.
Well, I mean, and this might be a good opportunity to start pushing those boundaries a little bit. Hey, we have not gone over our quota for the last 8 years. Hell, we haven't even been close to meeting it. We left 17% on the table last year as it was. I mean, we've shown that we are managing it. We haven't gone over. I mean, I think it's, you're the one that has to, flip the bill on this to sell it, but to be able to say 7 days a week, with caveats that we're not going to go over our TAC, that we're not going to be fishing halibut when Puget Sound is open for Chinook, continue our heavy monitoring, I mean, I think we're in a position to push that boundary a little bit, or at least ask to.
I think, well, I hear you, Glenn. I will just say nymphs has been very helpful to us in the in-season changes that we've made, and helping us think about a way to put more details in our season structure. Flexibility in a way that is transparent with our intent, and we'll keep working on that. I think I expect a lot of discussion about that, Glenn, at the September and November council meetings. So you'll hear a little bit more about the need for flexibility as we start talking about some of the long-term changes that are being considered for under the catch sharing plan.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, shifting back to Lorna here.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not going to take a lot of time, just kind of review quickly some of the information from the season to date, because we've got quite a bit more that we want to talk about the catch sharing plan and what Heather was just referencing, some bigger issues to address. So yeah, for those folks of you on the phone, this is just, I'm just sharing a table of the catch to date. This is on our website, and if you're not sure where to find that information, just ping me. But the North Coast, and again, for brevity, I'm going to just kind of share what percent of the quota has been caught. Figure most of you are tracking some of these numbers anyways. But for the North Coast, we've caught 67% of the quota through the end of June. So leaving 33%. For Puget Sound, caught 54% through the end of June with 46% left. South Coast got a little closer at 81% with 19% left. And then the Columbia River also hit 86% of its quota, leaving 14%. At this point, where we're looking to move to the late season, we sort of are putting the quota into a Washington pool, and then are proposing some late season, or have already announced late season opportunity. But Heather, if you could advance to the next slide. Well, I see, Glenn, you have a question.
Yeah.
I do. I want to know what,
Okay.
well, if you have it available, how does this compare to the timestamp last year and the year before on June 30th? We have 67% of the quota for Washington remaining at this as of June 30th this year. What was it last year?
Last year we had caught only 56% of the quota, and I don't recall from the year before, but last year we were just barely over half. So we've at 67%, a little bit better progress than last year in terms of achieving the quota.
So being open 5 days a week in Puget Sound, then 7, then those extra days in 3 and 4.
Yeah, and also saw
about 17%.
Yeah, and also saw some higher effort, and North Coast actually had like there's one week that stood out to me. It was like really high catches, and Heather was still like, "Oh no, Lorna, that's still compared to the good old days." But yeah, so there was a combination, but certainly it looked like opening Puget Sound earlier in April and more days helped. I could see, yeah, the benefit of doing that for sure. And the fact that there wasn't, the weather was better this year. Did hear that at times catches were slow. It seemed like kind of, at least on the coast, we were hearing that through the spring. And then it kind of picked up. But yeah, overall, have used more of the quota we have available this year than where we were at the end of June last year.
So basically the 17% that we left on the table last year, we have pretty much ate that 17% in the opening before June 30th this year.
Yeah, roughly. So next one here, just kind of sharing a slide that shows catch per day. Beginning from 2005, noting that 2023 data are preliminary and obviously only for the first part of the season. Just some things that kind of caught my eye, and I've got more work to do to dig into some of the data that is like not represented here, but would be part of the picture as far as effort and looking more in detail at CPUE. But I just see that since 2016-17 timeframe, there's been a decline, a downward trend in catch per day across all areas. And this kind of even predates the pandemic years. So just thinking about that and what we're seeing with halibut and hearing from anglers about their experience on the water. Although this year, and you can kind of see, Glenn, this is where for 2003, you can see for the North Coast, the red box there was up against 5,000 pounds per day compared to about half of that last year. And likewise, the South Coast, you can see had somewhere in the range of 4,000 to 5,000 average catch per day. So a little bit of an uptick from last year, whereas Columbia River and Puget Sound are still sort of where they have been, kind of bouncing around a couple of thousand a day.
Yeah, you know, the years of the 2017, 18, 19, and even 16 is right after we corralled everybody to be on the same dates, and that really that really forced a derby mentality for all 3 days or 2 days of the week that Puget Sound was open. It created a derby mentality because it said, hey, either you got to go fishing now, it doesn't matter what the weather says, or you're not going to go this year, period. So ever since the pandemic, when we actually opened up, that really gave people a lot more options. Say, hey, you know, I don't have to go on this bad day. I can actually go later. And it got rid of that derby mentality.
Okay, good. That's helpful to hear. Better understand some of what I'm seeing on my end. So I think then the next slide there, Heather, based on having the quota available coming out of June, we announced last week, I think it was last week, July feels like ages ago already, additional opportunity for halibut. So Columbia River and the South Coast will open August 26th and 27th. They'll also open Friday and Saturday, September 8th and 9th, and Friday, September 22nd. And that nearshore area of the Columbia River will remain open. So it is open now and will stay open through September 27th. For the North Coast and Puget Sound, we proposed or are opening August 17th through the end of September, 7 days per week. And then based on angler input, we've increased the annual limit to 6 fish, and a shout out to the licensing folks for working with the vendor to come up with a solution for us to be able to do that. So catch record cards with 2 lines should be available to folks, and those are free. I'll say that this is something Heather and I have, listened to anglers. We know there's differing views about whether 4 fish or 6 fish is most appropriate. But we thought with the quota that we have left and just looking for, I guess we've been taking baby steps, trying to figure out how to adapt to the fishing regime in these post-pandemic years, that let's try it and see. So it's a temporary, it's just linked to this late season opportunity, and kind of just hearing from folks that, hey, I caught my 4 fish. I'd go back out again, but it's kind of expensive. If I could catch 2 more and I can take others, that would help me out. So that's kind of the rationale behind that. So again, all the openings are dependent on available quota. When I was playing around with the number of days with the quota we have and the catch rates, assuming they're somewhat similar to this spring or a little bit lower, we won't get all of this by the end of September. Like we'll have to close if catches continue like they were this spring. I just can't say where and when that will happen. It's really difficult to know. We just don't have enough track record with this late season fishery.
Well, there's definitely more fish caught in the springtime for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dogfish, there's all kinds of things that people say
Exactly.
are not as positive about the late season. We hear from some folks that they are actually looking forward to it. So there's a mix. But yeah, certainly better catches in the spring. So I think that's it from my end. Now we kind of jump back to ideas for 2024. Oh, Steve had a question.
Is my mic on?
Yep, we hear.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I kind of wanted to respond to Glenn a little bit, but you guys can, it's like 4 or 5 years ago, the TAC was less. You guys, I can't remember exactly, but when the FC whatever, the TAC went up to 1.5 million, that allowed, there's only so many people that'll go fishing, and it allowed less of the derby mentality that Glenn was talking about. When the TAC is lower down in the 700 level, it's a derby. And when the TAC gets to a point and people relax a little bit, it's awesome because like you pointed out too, you know, you don't, it's less of a derby mentality and you don't have to go on the bad days. So, I don't know. I just want to make that point. It's a big deal if the TAC can remain at, you know, if it stays up there, because if it goes backwards, then we'll be in the same boat where, you know, it's a derby and you gotta go and everybody's full and the private boats gotta go. And I don't know. There's kind of a tipping point at a number 1.2 or whatever when it's a more relaxed atmosphere and it spreads out the opportunity. But
from 2008 to 2015, the 2A TAC was around 900,000 pounds, and one of those years it was 800,000 pounds. So I mean, that's total for Washington, Oregon, California, commercial, tribal, everything. That's exactly right, Steve. So, those were stressful years.
Yeah. Yes.
So here again, like Lorna said, that looking at how 2023 has played out gives us some things to think about for looking ahead. So we've jotted down some of these ideas, some that Lorna and I had, some that we've heard from you guys already. So for marine areas 1 through 4, thinking about especially the North Coast, marine areas 3 and 4, maybe starting out opening 5 days per week, Thursday through Monday, similar to what's open in CQ. In Marine Area 1, potentially adding a weekend day for Memorial Day weekend, and also adding those Tuesdays in Marine Area 1, similar to what was done in Westport. So both those areas are 3 days per week. And thinking about June, again, going to the 3 days per week and maintaining that through June. Maybe in Marine Area 2, where we've got the 4 days that we set aside, maybe adding to those days, adding maybe 5 days. And again, in June in Marine Area 3 and 4, just either going to 5 days or perhaps 7 days per week in June for the North Coast. Keeping in mind, this is a quota managed fishery. We get weekly estimates. We close the fishery when we're projected to take our quota. And so that by saying these ideas, it doesn't mean we're going to exceed our quota. You know, we're going to keep the fishery open until we reach our quota. But Glenn, I'll just walk through all of these and then get your question. So for Marine Area 5 and the eastern region of Puget Sound, again, aligning Marine Area 5 with areas 6 through 10 as we did before. In Marine Areas 5 through 10, potentially thinking about an option that's 7 days per week in April, or 7 days a week in April and 5 days a week in May, something like that. Or we've also heard there's some interest in areas 6 through 10 being open in February. So really opening early. And then in all areas in August and September, we have opened Marine Areas 5 through 10 when salmon season closes, which is about mid-August. We've kept that opening to 7 days per week. And then in August and September, increasing the number of days we were thinking about there. And so, you know, as we think about those ideas, you also want to have these bullets here to keep in mind of impacts to yellow eye rockfish. We do have higher quotas for yellow eye rockfish than we did for a long time, but we also know that when halibut is open and when lingcod is open, that's when we'll catch yellow eye rockfish. We are constrained to sampling. That's something to think about. Our sampling programs work incredibly hard to accommodate our seasons, but this is a challenge I think we've all experienced where in everywhere, not just in fishery management, it's in hiring people and hiring people to be port samplers, particularly in these remote areas where housing is becoming challenges. It's really been hard. I feel for our sampling programs who are struggling to hire staff to fill these positions. And thinking about ideas like the opening in February, there's really some issues around the regulatory process that could make that especially challenging. We also need to keep in mind that the Columbia River proposals, we want to coordinate that with Oregon. And we also, in Marine Area 1, we do have a directed commercial fishery that starts the 3rd week in June, I believe, and make sure we aren't having overlap with the sport fishery occurring on similar days as the directed halibut fishery. I will pause. I've got 3 hands. Glenn, I think your hand came up first, and then after that, I have no idea.
Dave came up first. Let's see what he has to say.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
Hello, guys. Thanks. First, I'd like to thank Lorna and Heather. You know, I reached out to you guys before we even had numbers for the North Coast to add days, and it took longer than we all would like, but I want to thank you guys for that, and thanks again for the 6 fish. I think that's, like I've always asked, to have something fluid there. When we have a lot of quota, a larger limit would be nice, and when we have a smaller quota, you know, a smaller limit would be very nice. And to have it fluid, I think, would be really helpful. As for the North Coast, talking to Jim and Randy and Tom and everybody, we're all on pretty much the same page. We want to keep the catch sharing plan status quo. We're always willing to share our fish at the end of the season, but we've had an agreement, you know, Phil and I, and we've all talked at the last meetings, to give us another year on the North Coast to at least figure out what the new normal might be. And I would like to keep that agreement going next year. I like the idea of at least adding 4 and possibly 5, like you've got on there, Heather, for nymphs to have, and then, you know, not knowing what our quota is going to be, start conservative and be able to open it up right away for more days, because we've all witnessed it with Jim and Randy and I that, you know, we're gone in 4 or 5 days, 6 days on low quotas. Mm-hmm. So that's our feeling and my feeling on the North Coast. And if Randy and Jim want to jump in, they can. And then, you know, we've always shared our quota, and we always will. And but we want to have our North Coast area open for us and for everybody else at the beginning, and then we got to catch our fish, or other states want them. Marcy's already called me once on our PFMC meeting for the trollers. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
I want to reiterate what Dave said. I think that's a really good idea. Puget Sound left, what, 38,000 pounds last year on the table? Lorna, is that right?
Roughly, yeah, somewhere in there. It was
I mean,
the bulk of that.
With that being said, I'd like to see Puget Sound go 7 days a week, starting April 1st through June 30th. Then again, back to 7 days a week after King's shut down. Mm-hmm. I mean, with 38,000 pounds with Puget Sound, I think there's more than enough fish to do that. And as far as opening earlier, I think April is a good time step to start. That helps staff out, because we got staff out there for sampling already for areas that are open for blackmouth. Mm-hmm. So they won't have to bring staff on earlier for that.
Thanks, Glenn. I think Brandon's next, and then Butch.
Yeah, what Glenn just said, I agree with everything. As long as our quota is high, let's start in April, 7 days a week through June, and then fire it off again as soon as Kings are closed. Yeah, the February and stuff. I mean, that's big steps. At least let's start off baby steps and adding 2 more days a week. I think that's a great start.
Okay. Thank you, Brandon. Go ahead, Butch.
Yeah, Heather, thank you. And thank you, Lorna, for all the work and making it easy to understand. We're at Owaka, we're not all educated like those guys to the north of us. So we need crayon presentations. And I thank you for that. You've done a great job. A couple things. Dave kind of touched on it. California is coming after halibut quota. They see the need, instead of having 100-day halibut sports season, they need a 150-day halibut sports season. And I, for one, am hard over on that one as a big no. Why we are, sometimes struggling to get 3 or 4 days if this quota changes, and it'll just make the problem even worse if they are able to move quota out of Washington down there. So in saying that, and I agree with Dave in these fall fisheries, we have to use our quota, and we have to figure out how to use it because people are looking to take it. And remember, there's another state there are a couple states that can vote against us. Not that they will in this matter, but it is always potential to have them ripped out of our hands by a vote. But Heather and Lorna has done a great job in stating our case on why we don't have any extra halibut to give. But in saying that, we can't leave any on the table. As far as 24, I think I saw it, Heather, but I just want to make sure. I think Westport and Elwaco think a little differently on this, which is cool. Not trying to overshadow or presume that Elwaco is right. So, but we still like to maintain our June is going to be open, and not do anything differently. Meaning, if we get closed down before the June closing date, we will take that risk on calling our customers and telling the season closed. That doesn't bother us because we have a whole winter to sell our trips for May and June. And like I said, if we happen to be a little more lucky or a little more aggressive, or the fish bite a little more, it's on us to call our customers and say, you missed out this year. So I think that's one thing that we differ from Westport. But other than that, and it doesn't, that's cool that we differ. But I think we should always, like you've done, try to mirror, Westport and the Columbia River as much as we can on that. So that's just it in a nutshell. And thank you.
Thank you, Butch. Steve, go ahead.
Hi, Heather, Lorna.
Hi, Steve.
Yep, appreciate what Butch said. Don't love that guy, and appreciate you gals for what you do. And one suggestion for Westport area next year is after the deep water. I see what you got here. 4 or 5 days for area 2 in June, but what might be consistent is to, after the 15th or right in there, is do the 3 days a week, which is consistent with the May days of Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. I don't know how many that days are actually, but that could be an option for our area to put on the shelf. And last year was awesome that we had the 15th and 18th and the other day, a couple days. That was really, that helped because they were out there, and so we could really plan for them, monitoring the season, and it worked out for quite a few charter guys to save those days for halibut. And that was great, rather than not have them posted, and then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we have these days. That doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
If you have
Right.
them on the calendar for us, we can choose to do whatever, save them for halibut or book them or whatever. But that was appreciated how that worked. And so I'm just kind of suggesting 3 days a week after the 15th in the month of June for halibut.
Okay.
If, let's
Okay.
pray, the TAC is still 1.5 million or about. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Welcome.
Dave,
Dave.
did your hand go back up?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
I would really, really like if we could schedule our October meeting in person. I'm sick of these Zoom meetings. We've been doing it for too long. I would love to be able to start having in-person meetings again. It's always worked out very well with all of us together.
Yeah, that would be
Just my
nice.
2 cents.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. I think you mentioned that
Thank
before, and
you.
I apologize. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it sure would be nice. At least the
Yeah.
October meeting for our planning.
Okay.
Thank
We
you.
could do a hybrid for sure.
We could do hybrid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Lowell, go ahead.
I'm just curious, on the 6 through 10, the February stuff, why not 5 included in that? Area 5. It says area 6 through 10. Why not 5 through 10 there?
This is a idea that somebody brought to us, and they were specific to 6 through 10. I don't, it doesn't have to be like that, but that's how we heard it. This is not a recommendation from us.
Right.
Mhm. So,
I mean, one side of that, just for me as fishing, hey, I wouldn't mind an opportunity to get out a little earlier, right? Maybe not 7 days, but 3 days with the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, come up and go see Glenn, I guess.
Will you have everything in place by February, Glenn?
No, me and Brandon will not be putting docks out that early. We will not be putting docks out until maybe
We don't
at the
need
early
docks.
end of March.
I don't need a dock. We can pull it out. I just want to go fishing. Earlier we had to pull them out even when the docks were in this year.
Yeah, we did.
Well, so what we did here in these next couple of slides is anticipated some of these ideas and put them out here as a potential range of options. So keep in mind that what we put out for the September council meeting is a range of options. We can identify a preliminary preferred alternative, but it allows for more discussion between September and November, or September and our October meeting. And so I'm just going to walk through what these range of options look like. This is a draft for discussion. So let's see, that didn't change. There we go. So for range of alternatives for 2024, I've got status quo for Puget Sound. This is, and the dates here are 2024. So status quo, just to orient folks, that's opening April 4th through May 20th, 5 days per week. That's Thursday through Monday. Memorial Day, it was open Friday through Sunday. And then open May 30th, and I did May 30th because that's Thursday, through June 30th, 7 days a week. It's basically, except for June 30th, it's for June is 7 days a week. And then if there's quota remaining, it'd be 7 days per week in August and September. noting that we do that opening after Chinook closes right around mid-August. And then, so an option one here, and I think this captures what you said, Glenn, and what Brandon was supporting is bumping that April opening to 7 days per week. So it's basically just full on 7 days per week starting in April and going through June. Right now I have the Memorial Day dates in here, so the wording would have to be changed because it's obviously 7 days per week, except for Memorial Day. And so my question to you is, would you want to maintain the Memorial Day where it's just Friday, Saturday, and Sunday?
No, that created some confusion this year and last year too.
Okay.
Quite honestly, I was kind of surprised that it came. That's one of the reasons I tried to get a hold of you earlier this spring, is because I was kind of surprised it came out that way. Because last year I thought we talked about it, that we were going to leave it the whole 5 days. This year it was 5 days, then it was down to 3 days, and that kind of really screwed a lot of people up. So I was kind of surprised when I seen that this spring. So no, we would like to see it the full 7 days.
All right. That's option one.
Thanks.
7 days. And then option two captures this idea that we heard for a February opener. I aligned that with the 7 days per week. I don't know how far the season could get if this is again, all of marine areas, 5 and 6 through 10. So I'd like to hear a little bit of input here on this February idea, if that's maybe preferred for just 6 through 10. And again, it's just an option for public review. We need a lot of input. We have reached out to National Marine Fisheries Service on the idea of February, and I will tell you that February is probably not doable. So if the IPHC has their meeting the last week of January, that's where the quotas are set. And then from there, there's a process to implement the season dates into regulation. And I know it's challenging for NIMS to just get the rules in place by March, but I don't know how they could do February. So that's why, even though the request was to think about February, why I said February or March, 7 days a week, and this is through June, and then I just assume wide open. But here is where I need a little bit of input on option two.
The February and March, or even February or March, that's a pretty big step. That's adding 30 days right off the get-go before anything happens. What Brandon was suggesting and I suggested, an extra 2 days for the 12 weeks. That's 24 days is what we're suggesting to add to the schedule, compared to 30 or 60. So I would think that'd be a really big step to be hitting the Puget Sound quota with. And also, like you said earlier, staffing for fish checkers would be really hard to. I seen a note there from Ann that they're still having problems trying to find fish checkers for our salmon season for April, or our halibut for our salmon for April next year. So they're already having staffing issues trying to get checkers in the first place, just for our normal seasons, not to add more to it.
And then I'd like to put something in there too. This is Brandon. We're not going to have our docks put in. It's just too much risk. And I guess, to be fair for CQ, if the other areas were hell bent on going that route, then I think there needs to be a quota cap, just so that we can still have opportunity to fish halibut, to make it fair. And what that is, I guess we can discuss that at a later date. But yeah, I mean, what if the fish are in there and those 4 areas had a heyday with it? It would devastate this little community.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that,
a fair point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then the other thing is, even if they wanted to open early, make it, 1 day a week or 2 days a week or something that's not so full blown.
Mm-hmm. So what I feel, I'll go to Jeff here next. Is so for at least from Glenn and Brandon, if this early season idea or support for it, but not in Marine Area 5.
I mean, they won't have the resources to be out there. I mean, that east wind down here during that time is atrocious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's downright dangerous at times. Well, it is dangerous most of the time during that time frame.
Okay. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I'd like to see it open in Area 6, 6 through 10, I guess, if that's how you package them in March, and 5 days a week or 7 days a week. I don't think you really need to worry about us having a heyday in here. The fishing is actually pretty close to terrible. The graph Lorna showed of catch per day in Puget Sound is approaching 0. So it's, I don't think you need to worry about it, but it is nice to spread the effort out and to be able to go when the weather's good, even though the catch is marginal at best.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I mean that's the thing for Puget Sound is we know even from the halibut abundance in the Puget Sound can be really variable. So it's very unpredictable what we will see in March, with the idea of opening in March. We don't know what that'll look like. I know Glenn and Brandon probably remember just the idea from going from May to April. We were somewhat nervous about it. It had been since 2010 before we had the season in the Puget Sound open in April, and we knew that catch rates were better in April than they were in May. We had just come off, multiple years of exceeding the quota in the Puget Sound region, and kind of had that whole, we had our new catch estimate system in place where we were getting the weekly estimates, where we had some assurances that we could close if things went too fast, too quick. So anyway, yeah, appreciate that idea, Jeff. This is the idea here, is to get something out for public review. This is where we will get comment and input and come back to you all in October and select the final preferred alternative. With no hands up, I'm gonna just keep things moving. After we get through this, I know I still have a couple other things to share with you. So I did a similar exercise for the North Coast. So status quo, it opened May 2nd through May 18th. That's 2 days per week, the Thursday and Saturday. And then Memorial Day weekend, open Friday and Sunday. And then in May, again, it's really the opening in June goes back to 2 days per week. The option I put here is opening the North Coast 5 days per week, Thursday through Monday. In May, this option here has Memorial Day weekend status quo, Friday and Sunday, and then goes back to 5 days a week for June. So the idea here, this goes back to the red highlight, is putting whatever days we're going to be open in June in regulation and not trying to do something that expands the number of days in June through in-season action, but getting it in regulation. What do you think, Dave?
I like having it in there. It doesn't mean we have to use it. And that's what I keep saying is I like having the flexibility. Since I unmuted myself. On the Puget Sound thing, yeah, I would love to see it open earlier. The issue you're going to have, like you said, is, you know, when we get done with salmon in mid-April, it takes nymphs 30 days before. So we got to put stuff in the year before for the first 2 weeks of May.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it takes them at least a month, if not 5 weeks. So
yeah.
But yeah, I like having it in there. I think I would do 4 days per week, not the full 5. Get rid of the Monday.
Mm-hmm.
But I like having the flexibility. It doesn't mean we're going to use it, but it sure would be nice to be able to not have to wait 3 weeks to add those days like we did this year in June and last year.
Okay. So just to make sure I'm following, like having the flexibility part, like if we came back, when we get back together in October, we're going to pick one of these.
Right.
Okay. And we could pick even, what we could do is just, we could change the slide to say, 4 days per week, Thursday through Sunday.
Yeah, I would like 4 days per week, but like I said, we might start conservative and keep our normal Thursday and Saturday, but have the option to add days quicker than what we have been able to.
Yes, I'm not following.
He-
If
he's
they're
basically
not
saying-
My thought is, Lorna, if we put it out there that we can do this in the catch sharing plan or with nymphs and stuff, but if, say, when we're up, you know, in Anchorage in January and we get a 900,000 pound quota, we're dang sure not going to go 4 or 5 days a week. We're going to choose to go back to our normal options.
right,
Because
so
we've had seasons where we've had 5 and 6 days, and it just doesn't work for the small communities on the North Coast. But I like having the flexibility that the end of May, if we don't have the effort and we're still in a recession or whatever you want to call it with $6 a gallon gas, and you know it's a destination to get up to the North Coast, and we're not seeing the effort when it's quicker and cheaper to go to Westport when you're 2.5 hours versus 4. And Morage in Nia Bay is $650 a month in May versus $400 during the salmon season. So, you know, it's tough. And I see Randy had his hand up too. So I'll shut up. Thanks.
No, that's okay, because I had, just to clarify, what we're proposing is to put this in catch sharing. The catch sharing plan can actually be a little bit more general than this, but this is what we would propose. And hearing what you said, like instead of option 1 with 5 days a week, we would go to 4 days a week, but that's what we would put in regulation and announce at the beginning of the season. So
Yeah, but if it comes back that we don't have 1.5 million for attack, we're not going to want to. Puget Sound's not going to want to be open 7 days a week either, right? This is part of the catch sharing plan. We don't know. We really don't know what it's going to be until attack is set. But but they're forcing us to put all this in the catch sharing plan. And that kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Why can't we just be 7 days a week and we'll do what we seem necessary based on the TAC? So if we have to put it in writing, okay, here it is. Here's 4 days a week for area 3 and 4. But if that TAC comes back to 600,000 pounds, well, they're not going to want to be 4 days a week. It'd be gone in 2 days.
Right. And I think we can have up to 7 days and schedule less. We can describe that in the catch sharing plan.
I think so too. But I think that this is a really important point that we're going to want to make in our report, is that these dates that are out for public review and really rely heavily on a 2A TAC above 1 million pounds, probably above 1.3 million pounds. You know what I mean? We 1.1 million pounds or 1.1 million pounds. I think these might be a no-go.
Right.
So anyway, but I think we want to make that very clear in our report as they go out for public review. And then Lorna, you and I think about how we think about this, what happens after the annual meeting.
Right. Yeah.
So
I was
my
just
thought
thinking
would
of
be
kind
is
of,
you put down our, sorry, Lorna. My thought would be you put down our normal days, Thursday and Saturday, and then put something in there if quota is available with the option of adding these extra days up to 4 days a week.
Mhm.
And that should suffice with nymphs, I would think that, and put the days of the week, put Thursday through Sunday or something like that. If the quota is available, we have the flexibility to do that. But if we want to stay conservative and keep it open, then we stay short, just do our normal status quo.
Yeah, got it.
okay. That's the if then kind of,
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I love having
Yeah.
the flexibility like we do with salmon.
yeah.
What
Okay.
are your thoughts, Randy?
Yeah, I was just curious, are we really concerned about Memorial Day weekend anymore? Is that a bottom fish issue?
The Memorial Day issue is going back to those years where the quota was taken in very few days. And we knew that, if every day of Memorial Day weekend was open, it'd be popular and we could take a lot of quota on Memorial Day weekend.
Right, I get
We've,
that. But
you've obviously not been taking the quota in the last couple of years, so
correct.
but it's the question is to you. Do you want to maintain this Memorial Day weekend idea where it's just a few days of Memorial Day weekend?
Yeah. What do you think, Dave?
Well, if we have the 4 days a week in there, we can change it. Or just
Okay.
get rid of the Memorial Day weekend thing and just have it available for 4 days a week and wait until we see what the quota is going to be in January.
Yeah, it would simplify the verbiage.
Yeah, or Chadwick's going to be down our throat.
So I'm hearing option one is more like what we did for CQ, where option one is 4 days per week, May and June.
Yep.
Okay,
And then
got it.
7 days a week in August, September.
Okay, got it.
That's perfect. I really like that.
Okay. Okay, then we've got South Coast and Columbia River. Here, so for South Coast, the status quo is 3 days per week. That in 2024 would open May 2nd, and then Memorial Day weekend is open on Thursday. And then here's the 4 dates, Steve, that I took the dates from 2023 and picked the same dates for 2024. So that's 13, 16, 20, and 23. Option one, I think, is what you were saying. So 3 days per week in May, and then Memorial Day weekend, I kept the same. And then if there's quota, I added Tuesday. Let's see. So 13, 16, I added Tuesday the 18th. I'm pretty sure this is Tuesday the 25th and Thursday the 27th. Not looking at a calendar to know if I got that right, but
That's correct.
okay.
30th. I think that looks great. Option 1, 13.
Yeah, that gives you
Thursday.
Thursday, June 13th. Sunday is the 16th. Tuesday, 18th.
Thursday.
And then Thursday.
Sunday,
Mhm.
Tuesday, 25th, and then ending on,
That looks beautiful.
Sunday, the 30th.
oh, it should end on Sunday, the 30th. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, that
That looks good.
great.
I
Yeah.
hope we get there, Steve.
Me too. It's like we all said, it depends on the TAC, and
Mhm.
right.
I'm very appreciative of you guys, putting the dates on the shelf for the opportunity instead of, waiting and then adding, because that doesn't work as well as the
Yeah.
program we were talking about now. So
Mhm.
much appreciated.
And if we catch it before, then
Yeah.
we close.
That's right.
So then,
It was a good season.
right, that's right. So then Columbia River, we've got the 2 days per week, Thursday, Sunday. Memorial Day weekend is the 23rd, Thursday the 23rd. And then in June, status quo was the 2 days per week. So option 1 does aligns the May opening with Westport. So adding in the Tuesday, it maintains the status quo. And here, the difference here is it starts the 3 days per week up right at June. It doesn't wait for that deep water lane cod like we do for Westport. So it just starts May 30th. It would go through June 30th, 3 days, back to the 3 days per week.
Are you talking?
I'm waking up. I'm waking up here. That sounds good. We're going to add Memorial Sunday in, and I think what Dave was trying to say,
Yes.
is load the toolbox with all the tools that we can, and therefore, if we decide we need a tool out of the toolbox, it doesn't take us 3 weeks to open up a Tuesday. I think that's what Dave was essentially saying, is have the playbook with a double reverse flea flicker if needed. And I am for that. I am for figuring out how we can work within the system as the rules are written to our advantage. That's where I'm come from. But as far as Area 1, I think it looks great. I think that as long as within the rules, we might choose to go to 3 days of week on May 19th. I think that should be an option in there somewhere in the rule book or in the toolbox. But as far as what I think looks good, have the days in June all planned out, and we'll be responsible for calling our people if we don't quite make it. And if we do, God bless America, we'll see you in August for a potluck dinner with everybody putting halibut at the table. So
I missed the part about May 18th.
well, I'm just saying is if the early May is complete washout with weather and stuff, and we're behind, maybe we would want to add a third day a week in May if maybe later on in the month, to leading into June. I think that should be maybe possible, and that would be something that would be in the toolbox. Maybe we have 3 day a week in Columbia River and the state decides to fish, the state decides the rules will be 2 days a week and until June. And then that way we could add a third day in May if we so choose.
Isn't it 3 days a week anyway? In option 1?
Is it 3 days a week? I can't read.
You guys are, I get what you're thinking we can do. I get it. I don't know if we can. Like, I'm hearing you, like hearing Dave say something very similar, like we put out all these different ideas and then we decide at the moment what the best one is. But the problem is that nymphs is going to put dates in, they need to put dates in the rule. And we need to, and maybe we can do something that has, and if the 2A TAC is below 1.3 million pounds, the season's dates would be this. I don't know. We need to talk to nymphs about this, how we do it. We have time. I think what we have here is really, really good range of alternatives. It sounds like it's got all the things that you guys would want to be out for public review. I think Lorna and I have some work to do to prepare for what we what the final recommendation is for November, to think about what that looks like. And we need to talk to nymphs about that too. What you're saying, I get it. I mean, I really appreciate your realistic thinking about the 2A TAC and that there is some vulnerability to us not having the 1.65. Also think about, the arguments we've made and our approach. I know that we would, that the tribes are going to be wanting to advocate for maintaining some kind of a consistent 2A TAC above a certain level. And so know that we'll work on that. And I hope you all think about how you can also, as stakeholders, provide input on that to the IPHC. But anyway, I think I've got an understanding of what you all want. I think we have a good range of options that include all the different ideas that we've heard here. And we'll just spend some time working on this before we get back together in October.
I think you and I got Glenn with a question, then Lowell and Steve.
Yeah, when these dates of the IPHC or nymphs, they put out a date for a fishery, if it's any fishery, and if something happens and there's not quota, don't they shut the fishery down?
Yeah.
Or suspend it? So that's nothing new to them. So there's already a process in place for them. If we, so it'd be the same thing. If we put in for 4 days a week and the quota's not there and we take away 2 days a week, I mean, that they already have the tools. They've done it before. So that shouldn't, I don't see how that can be an argument or an issue with them.
I think closing the fishery is a much easier process. And we've been clear, the regulations are clear that it's quota managed fishery and closes upon attainment or projected attainment. But what needs to be clear to the public is, what is it going to be? Is it going to be 2 days a week or is it going to be 4 days a week? Right. And that's where we need to be more specific. And we can't change that in season. That is, I mean, we can, but that is a much heavier lift, which is why we're trying to figure out the best dates to get in the rule. And again, this is not, we don't have to have this figured out at this point.
Yeah, I think, I hear that interest in the flexibility. But as Heather was saying, the issue for nymphs is having that transparency to the public up front and what the expectations are. And it's hard to write a rule that says, well, if things aren't going as well as we thought, or it goes faster, we're going to either actually fish some of these dates or not. I mean, we'd love that flexibility. That doesn't quite exist in the process as it is now. I do hear though, and I think it was really helpful, comments about if we have a lower TAC, what we'd want a season to look like versus if it's higher. And I think that is something what I've heard from nymphs so far, and we're gonna have to go back and have this conversation with them, is these sort of if-then scenarios to where when they announce it publicly, it's clear, and even through the process until we get the TAC at the end of January, folks know at least our initial proposals look one way if the TAC's higher versus what it might look like if it's lower. But once we get past that point, yeah, it's nymphs can close because that's, like I was saying, it's well understood by the public what the intent is. You get close to the TAC and you're going to close, but having some days kind of set aside to maybe use or not isn't something that I think meets that threshold of, being very transparent to the public in advance. So a little bit more challenging there. So, let's see. Lowell had a question.
Where a lot of this talk, because my question is, we got the extra tube, the extra card, right? A lot of this is focused on days, and I get that, but is there consideration that we may have some more opportunity as card, right? So I can get 6 or 8, right? If I go in April, fill my stuff up, I can't help y'all catch the quota on the North Coast, right? So, and I believe there might be some numbers about, a 10% of the fishermen catch 80% of the fish type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're tacking it as days here. You may do something with amount of personal quota for some of that. It's just a consideration. I know it would certainly help me and some of my friends.
Yeah, thanks, Lowell. We've been talking about the annual quota for the last couple of years and whether or not a change is needed. You're exactly right. We need to update the analysis we did when we did implement the 4 fish bag limit. But basically that analysis, that it said that really 85% of anglers catch 1 or 2, and only 15% of anglers catch more than 2. But again, we need to update that analysis.
I know there's some that could help catch them outside of
I know.
that bag limit.
Yeah. Okay, Steve and Butch. Steve then Butch, I should say.
Steve. So I want to go. Oh, you want to go first, Butch?
No, you're older. Go ahead.
Well, I forgot my original comment because I wanted to comment on something Lorna said. If the TAC goes down, I think for our area, we would still advocate for the 3 days per week and not go backwards to the 2 days per week. Because for charter businesses, like we've said before, the spring is more, for the economics is better for the charter businesses than the summer months. So if it did happen to go down, we'd still would rather pursue the 3 days a week and take our lumps in June or whatever.
I can see that. I can see that. The change that is proposed for the South Coast and the Columbia River is really conservative. So
okay.
I can see that. Makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And my original question, I got sidetracked, so it must not be that important. Go ahead, Butch. Thank you, you guys.
Get that age thing.
Oh, geez.
I I just, you know, I love you, Steve. I just want to comment, you know, on this, halibut business and stuff is, you know, that there's an avenue, maybe you can talk to Ryan Wolf or somebody to see if, you know, the current hard line stuff is completely necessary, and maybe we could point out the way it used to be a couple years ago. And you know, with you and Lorna, there's no doubt in my mind, you guys always look for every reason to say yes before you have to say no. And so you know what we're trying to do, as far as not getting into a place where it takes 3 weeks to open a Tuesday. I think that's the whole gist of it. And if that can't be done this year, then, you know, I know you guys have tried. And so anyway, whatever we get out of, you know, this part 4 will be positive, and as long as the quotas stay the same or near the same, I think it'll all be good. So I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, thanks, Butch. Appreciate that. Okay, I know it's 6.
I want to say was about the not that it's already a rule. You cannot catch halibut in area 1 when they're open, and when area 2 is closed, and take them back to a closed area. That's a great rule, and that needs to be emphasized to the public, which you already do, but that's a good thing. That was my original thing. So
Okay, got it.
out there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There'll be more I think we've got a great range of options. There's more on the council's agenda in September and November, and likely beyond. And folks that haven't been attending the council meetings or heard, you know, California is interested in changing the allocation, the sport allocation. If you remember from that pie graph, they get 4% of the non-tribal 2A allocation, and they want more. So it's opening up this process where, again, only for public review and discussion. Our enforcement folks have identified some changes to commercial regulations that they want to make. That's also in this kind of a longer term review. So this slide here shows we've got the annual routine measures. That's what we just talked about. We're really good to go here. And then this longer term process where it's separate from what we've just been talking about, that's also going to come up in September and probably beyond. So I'm just going to walk that through so folks understand what the request is and where we are with that. So at the June 2023 council meeting, I will say California was pretty transparent that they were looking to put something out for public review that would move allocation from Washington Sport and Oregon Sport to California Sport. And I think they've also been quite transparent that they'd like to see their allocation go from 4% to 7%. And so there was a proposal that we knew California was going to make, but in the discussion as it went on, I think the idea was that there should be, like we're talking about, if we're going to talk about 1% coming from Washington and 2% coming from Oregon, we should be talking about other options too. There should be a broad range of ideas to discuss, starting with California looking at their catch sharing plan and looking at their fishery objectives, like we went through early in the meeting here tonight, where we say, oh, the North Coast is open Thursdays and Saturdays. And that was all done to make sure that we could get through Memorial Day. California right now is open 7 days a week from May to November. And so, and as part of these options, so rather than just agreeing to consider shifting quota from our area to their area, I think there needs to be some consideration on their part for doing things they need to do to extend their season if they want it to go beyond November, 7 days per week. So this is a copy of the motion that was put out. And there'll be a lot of documents in the council's briefing book and a lot of discussion about these. So it includes this idea of improving management objectives in the catch sharing plan for each sector, requesting that California review their fishery objectives to achieve a longer season, so delaying their season opening or opening fewer days per week. This idea that we, that we expand the language in the catch sharing plan around this flexible in-season management, so that if the Washington Sport Fishery, which concludes on September 30th, has a certain amount of quota that won't be taken at some point later in the year, we can say, well, we've got 10,000 pounds that we won't take, and we can now shift that to California to extend their season. And then also that was adopted for public review and discussion is the idea of moving 0.5% of the Washington sport allocation and 1% of the Oregon sport allocation to California, and only in years where the FCEY is more than 1.5 million pounds. So we would only do it if the 2A quota was more than 1.5 million pounds or equal to. And then another option was added. We can look at this and think about whether we would make this allocation shift if the quota was above 1.3 million pounds. So there's options in here to change the catch sharing plan, put a request to California, shall we say, to look at their season structure like we have just done for the last 2 hours to maximize fishing opportunity in California to achieve the kind of season they want to have. Flexibility to allowing some kind of sharing of quota that will go unused in Washington or Oregon, or perhaps in one of the commercial sectors that won't take their full quota by the end of the season. Could that go to another sector that's in need at the end of the year? So this will all come up in September. I'll pause here before I go to the next slide. Steve, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to have my hand raised.
Okay, that's okay.
My bad.
That's okay. And so I also I put together this slide because I just, for those of you that are going to be listening to the council meeting, or maybe you'll be attending the council meeting in September, there's also, not only are there all these different alternatives, there's a couple of ways to do the math, to do the calculation on that 1%, 0.5% options of moving quota. One of them here that I'm just attempting to illustrate is where using the Washington sport as an example, which our status quo allocation is 35.6% of the non-tribal part of the 2A allocation. Washington sport gets 35.6% of that. This is where you can see California currently gets 4 and Oregon gets 29.7. The method here for calculating the 1% would just reduce the Washington Sport share to 34.6 or 35.1. So it's just taking 1% or 0.5% from this percent right here. So that's a simple way of doing the math. The other way of doing the math to do the calculation is to take, this is the actual number for the 2023 Washington Sport allocation. It was 281,728 pounds. And the other method of calculating what would go to California is to multiply that by 1% and take that amount and give it to California, or multiply that by 0.5% and give that to California. The results are really different. So this method really shifts a very small amount of quota to California. It shifts somewhere between 1,000 pounds to 2,000 pounds from Washington to California. The other method would shift about 9,000 pounds of the Washington allocation to California. So, but again, as this was coming up, we wanted there to be a range of what we were talking about here. And again, the options right now include making these changes only when the 2A TAC is 1.3 million pounds or 1.5 million pounds or more. I fully expect California to put in an option that would change these allocations amounts regardless of what the 2A TAC is. So while we put in these caps of when we would make these allocation, this was a Washington motion, I expect California to add a new alternative that would make that allocation change no matter what. So I'm sharing this with you. This will be part of the discussion. This is where you've heard people tonight talk about we need to take our full quota, because if we don't, people are going to think that we're not using it and that it's available to them. Our point to California, we have also been quite transparent in that we can achieve our quota. We have a history of achieving our quota. Not only do we have a history of achieving our quota, we do it in a very short amount of time. And so we really don't have quota to share. The other option that's out there is, okay, if we get to a certain point in the season and we're not able to take our share, yeah, we can, maybe there's a way to find a way to share that with you. So it's not left on the table, but it can provide opportunity in all of area 2A. We also want to show that, you know, this higher quota that we're taking it, that we need it. And it's been a very, very difficult thing to show because of these really different seasons since the pandemic. And like Lorna pointed out, maybe even since 2017, where things have looked a bit different than they did back in those earlier years. But as Steve pointed out, in those earlier years, we had a 2A TAC that was less than 1 million pounds. Anyway, this is on a longer track. Things aren't going to get decided here in November. The expectation is they'll take a lot longer to discuss. I do know that there is some interest from California to get something that can help them in 2024. What that's going to look like, I don't know. I think we thought the idea of the flexible transfer of quota from a sector that wasn't projected to take it before their season ended to California would have been a way that would have been palatable. But if this is, again, something to be aware of, this flexibility, this idea that we think we can be very flexible and do these things is a lot more challenging for nymphs to implement in rural. And so, and I know they're working hard and thinking hard about how they can do that. It's very much along the lines of, and Lorna said this a couple of times, like if then, if something happens, you know, in this parameter, then we'll do this. And if we can spell that out in a regulation, then I think that helps nymphs a lot with this transparency idea. But again, I've got just a couple more slides before we're done, but I'm done here, and I'll just pause for Butch.
Yeah, just real quick, Heather. California did do a good job of a really intensive letter writing campaign to the council. I think over 100. And I'm not saying we do this for September, but why I got all you guys on the phone from CQ to El Waco and Puget Sound, I'm assuming. You guys should be preparing to do the same when the time is right on whether you agree or disagree with this. But we will need to start hearing from Washington users, and you know, they did a sneak attack. It was really good, well coordinated. I got to say, it was very impressive. And I think we need to be prepared to do the same when the time is right. That's all I wanted to say, Heather.
Okay, thanks, Butch. I also want you all to know that I might have mentioned this if I didn't. Lauren and I are going to submit 2 reports for the September briefing book so that it's available to the public. It's available to the GAP, who will be talking about this a lot. The first report will summarize what we propose for our routine measures and our season structure that we just went through, the range of alternatives. Another report, though, is going to describe the history of management in Washington, so that people have the clear understanding of what we've done to have the seasons that we have. Why are we only open 2 days per week? Why are we so conservative and precautionary when we add days per week? Because we have come from a period where Westport is open 5 days and Nia Bay is open 4 days. And Puget Sound, you know, went from being open months to being open a number of days. And we didn't, when we were bumping up against our quota, we just kept cutting days. We didn't, you know, we did what we needed to do to extend our season. As Glenn was commenting, one of those things we did was every area opened on the same date, so somebody couldn't, you know, do a little tour and hit different openers. But that's what we had to do to provide meaningful seasons that certainly didn't run from May through November. And I think I said this too, where we often felt like it was a season was a success if we got through Memorial Day in every area. And yeah, so we intend on having a report that provides that context. So as people look at recent catches and see that there's 50,000 pounds of quota that's remaining in Washington, they also need to understand that we caught that same quota in a matter of days before, and we're really just in a period where we've seen some changes that are difficult to explain. But anyway, I hope that will help with the conversations in the GAP. This will be a challenging conversation, I'm sure. So I'm going to move on here and just give you an overview of the next steps. So again, the September council meeting is September 7th through 14th. The halibut agenda item will be on September 9th. You can listen into that. The meeting's in Spokane. And this is where we're recommending the 2024 season structure. And then also looking at these other longer term catch sharing plan revisions. In October, we'll have our other public meeting. We'll look at the options from September, refine them, and come up with a final season structure and recommended dates for 2024. And then in November, that's when the council will consider the public input provided by the states, by other stakeholders, and make the final decision on 2024 season recommendations. And then this is where then we'll go to the IPHC meeting in January. The date is the 22nd through the 26th in Anchorage, and that's where the IPHC will adopt the allocations for all of the areas based on the latest stock assessment. Let's see. And then, so wrap up, I think we did a good job of confirming that your options to include in the public review alternatives. And then again, there's just a review of what I just mentioned. This last slide here just gives you some information on where you can find landing updates from the IPHC. And then we also have our halibut and bottomfish regulations, including landing updates for halibut at this link. And then for questions, always feel free to contact Lorna or me. And then when we post this, you'll see that the last slide here are the dates for 2024. So if you want to look at those when you're looking at the other things, it's available too. Any questions or final thoughts?
Appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. You're doing a lot for all of the areas. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you. I know our appreciation is returned to you all. We're grateful to have really excellent stakeholders that we work with. And I leave these meetings feeling very glad to have your engagement. And so thank you, Steve, and everybody. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, on the pressure, we are seeing more and more people. And we had 4 charter boats from down south up here this year. So I think the pressure is going to start spreading out a little bit more. And that we're going to be getting a new marina in La Push, hopefully. So that might
neat.
draw a little more attention.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Good news. Good news, Randy. Glad to hear that.
Hey, since Paul Morani showed up late, does that mean he was buying drinks?
Sorry, I was late. I'm glad I got to listen in on some of the things here. So, but I'll be back. I have several ideas I want to share with you guys. Trying to compile them and make sense of it. So I'll be in touch.
Okay, Paul, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I can send you a link to the recording. It gets posted online, but if anyone wants it, I can just as easily send it to you as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I really, I got some ideas I'd like to propose. I mean, they're kind of out of the box to try to solve some of these problems. So I'll try to compile them and make sense of it as much as possible and get them to you, especially before we go to the September meetings and so forth.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, lady.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
Good evening.
Everyone?